Welcome everyone to today's session on balancing kidney nutrition, plant-based food substitutions. Before we begin, I'd like to review with you how to participate. We're offering this session bilingually using simultaneous interpretation. During the presentation, some speakers will present in English and others will present in French. To hear the presentation in your preferred language, click the interpretation icon, which looks like a globe in the Zoom toolbar and select English or French. Be sure to click Mute Original Video after you select your language. Au cours de la présentation, certains intervenants...
During the presentation, some speakers will speak in English and others in French. To listen to the presentation in the language of your choice, click on the interpretation icon, which looks like a planet Earth at the bottom of your screen on your Zoom screen toolbar. Click on the language of your choice, then click on Mute Original Audio.
We ask that you enter any questions you may have throughout the session into the Q&A pane at the bottom of the video. We'll collect your questions, and then at the end of the presentation, our speakers will address as many as they can. You'll also have an opportunity during the Q&A period to ask questions live as time permits. Please do feel free, though, to send any further questions to kidneyprograms@kidney.ca. For general comments during this session, there's a feed loop chat box at the right side of your screen. Please avoid using the chat box for questions because they need to be submitted through the Q&A pane to be seen and addressed by speakers. The information shared in this session is not intended to be medical advice. We recommend that you speak to your doctor about your own individual situation. And now, it's my very great pleasure to introduce you to our panelists. And we will start with Sarah Trudeau. Donc, Sarah has been a clinical nutritionist for 22 years. She's been practicing at Maisonneuve-Rosemont Hospital since January 2002. Her academic background led her to nephrology, and she's been working with this clientele since the very beginning of her career. She's passionate about teaching healthy eating and lifestyle habits to pre-dialysis, dialysis, and kidney transplant patients, as well as to all outpatients under the care of a nephrologist. She's committed to equipping her patients to make better food choices while enjoying eating. She's been a member of the board of directors of the RNNQ, Regroupement des Nutritionnistes de... I'll start that word. Regroupement des Nutritionnistes en Néphrologie du Québec for many years. This community keeps knowledge up to date, and they share information for better kidney health. An Epicurean, she loves discovering new flavors and dishes. In her spare time, she enjoys cooking, physical activity, and traveling.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Carrie. So today we'll talk a bit about kidney health and the importance of healthy eating. So generally speaking, balanced eating includes fruits, vegetables, varied sources of protein, complex glucids, and good fatty matters are important. Okay, so what is healthy eating? Healthy eating, it's a balanced diet that's varied, balanced. You also want moderation, appropriate servings, also a good hydration. And this involves fresh food they're not heavily processed. And when we talk about variety, we're talking about fruits. Oh, sorry, can we skip back to the previous slide? Sorry, I went too fast. So when you talk about variety, it's of all food groups, obviously. And when we say balance, is that we want proteins, glucids, lipids, and vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants. For moderation, we're talking more about limiting excessive sugar, fats, and salt. You know, moderation tastes better. I could even add alcohol also. It tastes better when it's taken moderately. And appropriate servings. Hydration, it's good during the whole day to drink water. And this involves that it's better when you cook your own meals as often as possible to eliminate uh, hyper-processed food or already prepared meals. So when we talk about plant-based foods, what does this mean? It's more vegetable or plant-based food, like fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and nuts. Now, for plant proteins, we have all the legumes, beans, whether they're black, white, or red, peanuts. Peanuts is also a legume, but we rather use it as a nut. There's also all these soy-based products, edamame, tofu, tempeh. They also belong to the family of legumes. And this is a complete source of protein for plant-based protein. Now, legumes. We know that these are good sources for fibers and protein. It often is good to replace meat. It's low in fat. And if you want to increase absorption of iron, it's important to accompany them with a source of vitamin C, whether it's fruits, vegetables like agrumes, strawberries, kiwis, melons, broccoli. No, vitamin C helps you absorb vitamin C. Now, if we talk about soya, it contains all the essential amino acids, which means that it's a high quality protein. It's naturally very low in saturated fat, contains good fats and saturated fats like omega-3 fatty acids, which we know are good for cardiac health. Also a good source of food fibers, and also contains isoflavones, which are phytoestrogens. So this can have beneficial effects on hormonal health, especially for menopaused women. And when we talk about fibers, as you know, it's for plant-based fiber. All the fruits and vegetables that are fresh or frozen or dried. Also complete cereals, couscous, quinoa, millet, kamut, and so on, as well as legumes, soya, we've seen it, and also nuts, the almond, walnut, Brazilian nuts, and seeds from chia and pumpkins. These are all, well, all plant-based are rich in food fibers anyway. Now, if we talk about what are the advantages of plant-based protein versus animal-based protein? Well, plant-based protein, you have a better control on acidity in the blood, so metabolic acidosis. The digestion of vegetable protein produces less acid residues than animal protein. They also give a better control on blood sugar because they have high fibers, a better control on lipids because they're low in saturated fats, as I said, because they have a lot of fibers. This also controls absorption of cholesterol. Now, seeds and nuts, these are good fats. They're not saturated fats, which are mostly of animal origin. And the plant-based protein give you better control on levels of phosphorus. Percentage of absorption of phosphorus present in the plants is twice lower than that coming from animal-based protein. So these are the benefits of now fibers. There are two categories of fibers, soluble and insoluble. Soluble, as far as oats, legumes, it reduces reduction. So they're associated with a reduction of the level of blood cholesterol. They also help you better control blood sugar. So fibers are important for this. It also fosters the feeling of satiety. So they make you feel like you've eaten enough compared to those that contain them less. So it's good for the management of weight. Also, the soluble fibers, this is often good for intestinal flora, so they're rich in probiotics to maintain a healthy intestinal microbiome. And insoluble fibers like wheat is more for intestinal irregularity to prevent constipation. Well, obviously, it helps to eliminate potassium if you have difficulty controlling your level of potassium. Now, information concerning the chia seeds. So it's very interesting. Soluble fiber, rich in omega-3, so it also contains antioxidants like polyphenols, which can reduce the oxidative stress in the body, source of iron, calcium, vitamin C, and they can be easily added, sorry. So if you put this in your smoothies or your yogurts, it's very interesting to add chia seed to increase your soluble fibers with antioxidants and omega-3s. The next one is hemp seed, very interesting. A texture which is more tender, and the taste is that of nuts. So a bit less fibers than chia seed, but an interesting source of protein. It's also an interesting source of omega-3, and the nutritive quality is similar to hemp seed, but the price, the flaxseed, but the price is higher for the hemp seed. And also, these seeds can be added to salads, yogurt, smoothies to give texture and flavor to recipes. These hemp seeds, which are less expensive than the flax seeds. Now, for plant-based food substitutes, these products, which are more easily available on the market as time goes by, they're they have advantages for health. So when we talk about, for example, to replace milk substitute, there are enriched plant-based drinks like soya, almond, oat, coconut, rice, so on. Now, as a substitute for meat, well, it's mostly in soya protein to do hamburgers. So based on soya protein, so tofu, tempeh, seitan, uh, pea proteins. There are also cheese. You have plant-based cheese based on cashew nuts. So also vegan cheese based on soya. There are all kinds of substitute products. You also have commercial egg substitute based on plant. There are non-hydrogenated margarines. To do cream, to substitute cream, you can take cream from coconut or soya creams. I put you pictures on the next slide. So you can see here there's fromage or feta cheese, plant-based cheese, uh, Beced plant butter, and there's also Bel Soy, which does soya cream to, for cooking. So there are a whole series of products on the market that are not based on meat or dairy to replace the milk and the cheese and butter. Oh, now certain, yes, these are plant-based products, but it's always important to validate the list of ingredients and also the nutritional value. It's not because it's plant-based that it's necessarily good. For sodium, for example, when you talk about uh, meat substitutes, normally there's a certain quantity of salt. So it's important to validate the nutritional value and these ingredients of these products. So for sodium, the good choices for food products, we want less than 10%. And you should avoid if it's more than 15% as far as a portion of servings. Now for nutritional claims, you have to remember that when it's written on a product without any sodium, it means that there's less than 5 milligrams of sodium per serving. Very low in sodium, it's less than 35 milligrams per portion. All these health claims, you can find them on the website of Health Canada. And of course, the Canadian Food Guide, half of your dish, fruits and vegetables, proteins, And also, it's very varied. You can see there's tofu, legumes, nuts, grains, but there's still a bit of salmon and chicken. What's important is to have a varied source for protein and your whole grains, quinoa, wild rice, whole wheat, and so on. I referred you also, well, the president of the RNQ published recently a book on kidney health, 21 days of menus. It's available here in Quebec in French. Unfortunately, it's not yet translated into English. She wants it obviously to be translated into English, but currently it's only available in French. So she prepared many recipes with plant-based, there's no red meat recipes in her book, so it's mostly plant-based recipes. It's kind of a Bible that you can have for healthy eating for your kidneys. These are recipes that are good for the whole population. They're controlled in their levels of sodium. So thank you for your attention, and I will take your questions now.
Merci beaucoup, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sarah.
From Karen. Karen Sevong is a registered dietitian with experience working in multicultural populations with chronic disease, including kidney disease across all stages, diabetes, and health heart management. Having worked with pre-dialysis and dialysis populations, she highlights nutrition throughout the continuum of care to optimize kidney disease management. Karen embraces the importance of exploring ways to incorporate new or favorite cuisines that fit within the broader experience of food. A certified diabetes educator and insulin pump trainer, Karen empowers patients through individualized counseling, cooking classes, and group education. Beyond nutrition, she weaves cultural stories with food and connects with all age groups. As a contributor to the Kidney Community Kitchen, Karen communicates with diverse audiences. Her dedication extends to clinical nutrition research, with presenting internationally on sarcopenia in the aging population. In her spare time, Karen enjoys rock climbing and cycling. Karen, would you like to take over?
Yes, thank you. And I am more than happy today to be introducing to you guys a topic on balancing kidney nutrition and finding some plant-based substitutions. And welcome, everyone. As you know, when it comes to balancing kidney nutrition, there are various considerations. Sarah has done a wonderful job in introducing to us the benefits of kidney nutrition and the plant-based products. As we go through the session, important things to consider would be that small changes over time make a big difference. And so keeping this philosophy in mind and carrying it into the long term. As we're looking at the benefits of plant-based, as we know, it can help protect regular bowel movements, increase fiber. It can also help with our heart health and balancing blood sugars. And so with everybody having individual needs and with different stages and types of kidney disease, we know that what we want to do is keep in mind our individualized recommendations. So working with your kidney care team is vital when it comes to coming up with individualized recommendations. There are a few nutrition concerns that could be different for different individuals. Looking at protein could be different. For example, somebody on dialysis versus like pre-dialysis. Other pieces to consider if a concern would be like potassium, phosphorus, sodium, or some of these other nutrients. So as we go through these slides today, I will be giving some recommendations just to offer some suggestions and ways that we can include plant-based products within your individual day-to-day. When it comes to the different sources, we know that medium potassium and phosphorus can come from different sources. And here you'll see that tofu being one category, keeping it to about like half a cup, whether it's a soft, medium, or firm texture is helpful. You can be using soy milk, keeping it to about 1 cup is also helpful. And all of these will also have some protein in it as well. And the ranges will depend on the brand. And so really looking at those labels will be super helpful. Other grains that we want to consider that have actual sources of protein, such as quinoa. Quinoa can be cooked and it can actually be a complete source of protein. And so therefore, you're actually getting the benefits of fiber, protein to keep us full for our meals. And so keeping it to about half a cup can keep the medium and the phosphorus and the medium potassium levels within that range. And of course, oatmeal is another great source of fiber as well. Not everybody with kidney disease may need restrictions. And so again, speaking with your healthcare team is a great way to kind of know where we would fall within this range. Some people will be cooking with various vegetables and fruits. And so a certain vegetable such as green peas actually contains a little bit of protein for the 1 cup when it's cooked. And of all the legumes, we highlight chickpeas. Chickpeas also, when it's cooked and when you buy it in an unsalted can as an easy way and convenience way to add into our diet, also can be added healthily into having about 8 grams of protein per serving. So all of these ways, just to say that medium potassium foods and phosphorus foods, if this ends up becoming a concern for you, we can still add in lots of plant-based options in small amounts. And certainly we want to look at the different types of tofus. And so there are different ways we know with textures. So a softer texture tofu is going to be great to be using in soups. Some people do it with vegetable broth. They'll boil it with various types of carrot, celery. You can cook it down into different flavors. And adding your seasoning, some herbs, some lemon, some garlic, but certainly will bring out the flavors of the tofu. And also some people make soup for some recipes, and on there you'll find this one in particular had like raspberries in it. And so other ways that we can add tofu can come. It uses soy, which is vinegar. So if you pan fry it or you marinate it with a little bit of herbs of some oil and you let it soak, it will actually hold on to the flavor a lot more. And so some people might do a stir fry with some vegetables, some rice noodles. They might stir fry it with like some eggplant or some bell peppers. Other creative ways, like the pan, and they're crumbling the tofu. So, and for like making, even like frittatas, and those are just some creative ways in which you can use a harder, firmer texture. And of course, like half a cup per serving the tofu will actually keep you within that realm of that medium phosphorus, medium potassium, if that's really a concern for you. Otherwise, you can be liberal in terms of the amount you use. And other grains as well, when you look at like couscous and when you look at quinoa. So on our next slide here, you'll see couscous, quinoa, barley, oats. These all are also helpful ways that we can include into our diet when it comes to protein and fiber sources. Keeping it again to about like half a cup to a cup is a great way to add as like a side. So using it as an entree, you can serve half a plate of vegetables. You can add it as like a healthy power bowl where you can top it with a mixture of like different lower or medium potassium choices if that's a worry for you. And what we can do with that is you can boil the grains. You can also make it into like an overnight oats or like an overnight porridge when it comes to quinoa, or some people even toast it and add it all to salads. And so those are an extra source of fiber as well. And for barley, if you keep it to about a cup, that will also help keep you within the limits. And so again, My Spice It Up, Kidney Community Kitchen, and a few other places are great ways to look for recipes. And so I want to also highlight, sometimes protein choices also comes from other things that we don't necessarily use in large amounts. Sometimes we get it from nuts, sometimes we get it from seeds. And so as Sarah also had mentioned, things like hemp hearts, chia seeds, ground flax seeds, these also are a source of fiber and protein, but in a small amount. So a tablespoon of these types of sources will give you about like 2 to 4 grams of protein. So they're a great way to garnish. Here you'll see that with nut butters, like such as peanut butter, almond butters. If you're making it into like these like energy bites, like These ones, for example, you would kind of add in like some vanilla extract, peanut butter. Some people add a little bit of sweetener if they wanted. And you can just roll it up and you don't have to like bake it or anything. And it uses Rice Krispies. And so you can see the balance in terms of the serving sizes. So kind of like if this is a concern for you, really looking at the portion is helpful to be able to include some of these things in moderation. And of course, like if we're using any type of mock meats or veggie ground, we just want to look at the labels. So sometimes like Beyond Burgers, Beyond Meats, like these ones might have additives with higher potassium and phosphorus. So you want to have a peek at that, but certainly they will be a source of protein. So just looking to see how you can fit that into your day-to-day. And the main thing I want to highlight as well with like the nuts, as you can see on the slide, there's different types of nuts, and like naturally occurring, we know that our body, when it comes to nuts and seeds, we only absorb a portion of it. So the bioavailability when it comes to how much our body actually absorbs when it comes to the phosphorus contents of these foods is really about like 40 to 60%, give or take, and that's a huge range. So cashews, almonds, peanuts, like these can still be included, but like it might be a little bit higher in potassium and other sources. So you might want to just see how that fits into your plan. Otherwise, 2 tablespoons of pecans, walnuts, macadamia nuts, these might be a little bit lower in phosphorus and kind of keep you within that range. I love to highlight ground flax seeds and hemp hearts and peanut butter too, because again, great source of fiber, some sort of protein as well, and a tablespoon of that can keep you within the range. And get creative. Try to bake with it, add it to smoothies. Sometimes people sprinkle it onto like their salads. So if we go on to the next slide, what we can see is when it comes to other sources of plant-based proteins, coming from textured vegetable proteins, so soybean-based, these ones are going to be a good source of protein as well, and you can rehydrate these. And so what you can do is you can use it and make it as taco fillings. You can make into mini patties, but you just really want to make sure that you have it in hot water, you rehydrate it before using, and keeping it to like about a 1/4 cup serving if you're really worried about your potassium and phosphorus levels, because they can add up quite fast. Otherwise, other ways like people use for fillings such as wraps, they might use like beans, kidney beans, lentils, 6-bean medleys, lima beans. Any of these beans are a good source of protein and fiber, and we here keep it to about a 1/4 cup if you're really worried about your potassium levels. But otherwise, you can keep it to about a cup serving, which, as you can see, good source of protein. It's about 12 to 16 grams of protein. So like compared to your meats, compared to your fish, right? Like certainly this could be a substitution that you can kind of use half of it to substitute maybe the other half with those animal-based proteins. And of note is buying the ones that are unsalted. No added salt into cans can be a convenient way to use it, or it can also be soaked overnight if you're going to do it dry, and that can leach out some of the additional potassium and phosphorus. I want to highlight edamame beans. This is just a very unique source because sometimes for a protein, it can also add up as well. You can boil it, you can actually add it and make it into a dip. You see in this picture over here, again, from a potassium concern, it is higher in potassium. So like you probably want to just keep the portion to about like a 1/4 cup if you're worried, and maybe just spread it out in terms of how we're adding some of these plant-based foods. All of these foods can be included in a kidney-friendly diet with the right amount of planning. And of course, like tempeh is one that can be used in cooking, and I'll talk more about it in a little bit. But as you can just see there, it does have potassium and phosphorus. So you can just look at how much we're doing with that. Mock meats and seitan is the 2 other ways that are used as well. Looking at labels and the portions for both of those will be important. Seitan is made from wheat gluten, and so oftentimes the way people make seitan is they do boil it and then they find a way to kind of bake it afterwards. And so keeping it to a 1/4 cup of seitan is one way to keep us within our limits of phosphorus and potassium if we're worried. So on to the next slide, what you will see is that I highlighted a few things when it comes to legumes. So ways we can add recipes for the lentils. You can make it into like a the mason jar. You can make it into like a salad. You can make dips like hummus and dals or other ways where legumes are used. And certainly adding into soups and stews, or looking at ways that we can choose our different types of pastas. Chickpea pasta, lentil pastas, those are available in the market. Again, of course, like the portions for that and how much we want to include it into our day. So keeping it to about half a cup or a quarter cup is kind of the quick, easy rule of thumb to kind of keep us within those limits. Otherwise, like I would urge you, get creative with fillings and things that we can use with our wraps and our sandwiches too, or salads. We can do chickpeas with our with couscous. We could do a little bit of cilantro and like dill, and like using those herbs to kind of flavor out some of the profiles when it comes to how we add legumes to give it a freshness. And other ways as well in terms of dips that I wanted to highlight too is some people would do like a combination of like a hummus or a tahini dip, right? Looking towards those ways as well to add flavor. Tempeh is one that I can highlight when it comes to cooking methods. So when it comes to tempeh, baking it is one method. Oftentimes you can cut it into blocks. You can marinate it with different seasonings. Some people do garlic powder, paprika, and then what you can do is you can combine it and then bake it and flip it halfway. And so this is just one way in terms of tempeh, and you can add it into like your power bowl. You can make it into a wrap to include it, or you can also pan fry tempeh. Sometimes people with tempeh, when they decide to pan fry it, what they'll do is they will cook it on one side and make sure that it is brown before cooking on another side. And from a lower sodium perspective, other flavors that you can add, like coconut aminos or like balsamic vinegar as substitutions instead of high amounts of salt, is a way to give it that flavor. And so sometimes tempeh is used instead of like chicken, or and when it comes to a potassium or phosphorus levels, you just want to again look at if that's a worry for you. A quarter cup or half a cup can be used in moderation, and perhaps combining it with other types of proteins in that dish as well. And so if we kind of like go and look into our next slide, we'll kind of think about, well, what are some ways that I can add more, plant-based proteins, and how can I get started? Or I'm already started at the stage, like what are some ways I can modify what I'm already doing? So if we go to the next slide, what we will see is just a quick example or guide in terms of like where we're at. So if we are all starting, let's say, with having our pan, I like to look at the palm of it. That's about like a deck of cards. So let's say that's how much protein we're having in the day, about 2 hand sizes or 2 deck of cards. And we want to make some substitutions. I often say start small, right? Like whether it's adding like a hockey puck size amount or half a cup size amount of chickpeas into our sandwiches, whether it's adding an egg in the morning, or we're adding protein coming from like a tablespoon of peanut butter. These are all ways that we are going to get protein aside from our red meats and our dairy products. Other ways is half a cup of tofu. So as you can quickly see here, like just taking away half the amount of animal protein. So instead of 2 hands, we use 1.5 hand size of animal protein, and the rest being plant-based. That's a great way where we can slowly incorporate it in a safe way. And of course, like other sources of protein, don't underestimate where it can come from. As I said, it can come from couscous, it can come from Greek yogurt, it can come from like hemp hearts, chia seeds, oatmeal, like all small minute amounts add up over time. But adding in a small amount will benefit greatly when it comes to heart health, when it comes to our gut. Kind of all of those fibers is going to help keep us regular. And so as we go onto our next slide, some things to kind of really think about. So just kind of having a look at like what time of day maybe you want to get started. Maybe you think it's your snacks, maybe it's your breakfast that you want to work on. But the most simple way to really start is kind of pick different food groups, figure out how you want to flavor it, what is the best way you'll add it, whether it's a daily thing, a monthly thing, or a
Oui, c'est
weekly
moi.
thing, and then just think about, sorry, and then think about whether it'll be for half a cup, a quarter plate, or whether you'll use it based on like a palm size. And your registered dietitian and kidney team is here to support you, and we're here to kind of help guide you when it comes to looking at what you're doing. We know with kidney disease that our potassium and phosphorus changes and other recommendations is so individualized, and so therefore there's no set number or no set way in terms of how we can help guide you in making changes. Thank you. And we're open to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Karen, for taking us through some of our plant-based options. We certainly have some questions already, but we'll save those until a little bit further along. We just want to give our two patient partners an opportunity to tell a little bit about their stories. So next, I'd like to introduce Normand Lefort.
Normand has been on dialysis for 5 years and has been working closely with Sarah Trudeau for 7 years to better his diet. Together, they are concentrating on preserving his kidney health and reducing his weight. Normand is gradually integrating more plant-based choices into his diet, implementing small adjustments over time. Normand, can you tell us a little bit more about your story? Yes, very well. With Sarah, for several months, I'm trying to lose weight, and I've lost almost 40 pounds in 6-7 months using intermittent fasting and all the recommendations that Sarah has given me concerning vegetables, legumes, fruits, good protein, and good fats as well. So it's going very well. I don't feel that I miss out on things. Satiety is already there, is always there, and I'm continuing following her instructions. And for now, it's as though I had gained new kidneys by respecting the different foods that are recommended for this kidney function. Thank you very much, Normand. Welcome. Now I would like to introduce Pierre Trottier.
Kidney transplant, so he began all of the preparatory tests. In October 2022, his file was accepted by Transplant Québec, and in November 2022, his health deteriorated and he had to start dialysis quickly. His wife had begun testing in October to be a kidney donor. His childhood friend, though, asked him what his blood group was and asked if he could take a blood sample to see if his compatibility was good. So after the blood test was taken, the hospital asked Pierre's wife if she would be willing to give up her place to his childhood friend. She said yes immediately because the chances of a transplant succeeding were good. His friend underwent all of the necessary tests and the results were very positive. So Pierre was on his way to a living donor transplant. After 7 months with the transplant, his results are very good and he's enjoying his daily life thanks to his friend. Pierre?
Would you like to share your story with us? Yes. I started by having kidney failure in 2013. My creatinine level was higher than normal, and it was rising until 2022. Then in October 2022, my kidney failure deteriorated. And this is where I started dialysis quite fast. My creatinine was at 505. So we started dialysis. And July 24, 2023, I received a donation from a living donor from my friend, old-time friend. And it's been 8 months and I feel wonderfully, and life is wonderful. I can tell you that. This is what I wanted to tell you.
Merci, Pierre. That is wonderful news. Congratulations on your transplant.
Merci.
Okay, at this stage, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for sharing their expertise and their personal experiences with us. We've learned a lot about how to incorporate plant-based foods in delicious and creative ways into our diet. So with that, I think we'll move forward with the Q&A section. If you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A box below this video. But we do have a number of questions, so why don't we start with one for Sarah? And the question is, which grain has the highest protein?
Generally speaking, all the whole grains have the same amount of protein. So from 3 to 4 grams per portion. And as I was saying earlier, what's important is to have a variety. If we have oat, quinoa, camus. The most important is to really have a diversified grain
Next question
intake.
is actually for Karen. Does age and lifestyle affect dietary choices or dietary restrictions?
Yeah, great question. So certainly kind of depending on where we're at in terms of our stages, the recommendations, we still kind of like encourage like regular physical activity when that's tolerated or movement. We still encourage overall healthy eating across all age ranges. Certainly when it comes to just finding ways that will kind of fit and be sustainable within our lifestyle at that stage of life. And so kind of keeping in mind what works with you and your lifestyle is more so important than focusing on like your specific age and at that stage.
Thank you very much. Really important to keep in mind.
During your, how did your diet help you during all the stages of your illness? Well, the fact that that I have Sarah with me since the transplant, but before that, I had another nutritionist. So the two nutritionists, I can tell you, it's really thanks to them, the good advice they gave me and their support, most of all their support. So with this, I lost quite a lot of weight, so I could receive this transplant. And it also allowed me to get to know many more foods. I incorporated more veggies, tofu, soya, quinoa, things that kids have been telling me about for many, many years, but it was not integrated in me. And I can tell you that with the help of the two nutritionists I had in my life, it's a total happiness and the support is wonderful from their side. This is my experience with them and I'm very happy.
Merci, Pierre.
Thank you so much, Pierre.
That support from nutritionists is really, really important. And I think it's great to hear that he's had a very positive experience. Next question is actually for Karen. Why is a plant-based burger high in sodium?
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. And I mean, I think oftentimes we have to think about like when these are getting made, like what is it that we need to keep it on the shelf life? Like how do we add flavor? And so not surprisingly, like certain times we do need to compensate in certain ways. And that's why like reading the labels of like what the additives are, looking at the percentages of sodium on those labels is helpful. And it could be higher because of the shelf life and textures of these foods. And so a good alternative in terms of instead of like focusing on the higher sodium is like, well, what are some ways that maybe I can include convenience and maybe add my own side to it? Or can I use like a substitute instead of like the flavors of the salt that's in this product? And so that's one way. If we know that the products we buy already have added sodium, maybe it's the flavors we add to it or other things we add to it is reducing salt that way too.
Can I add something to this? Yes, of course. I heard Karen, but of course, why are plant-based food more sodium? It depends on what was added, what ingredients were put in to do their little patty there. But you can do them at home as well. There are a lot of recipes that exist. It's very easy to do actually these veggie patties using tofu or black beans or chickpeas or other.
Norma, the next question is for you. What is your favorite plant-based meal? So how often do you eat vegetarian? What do you enjoy the most?
Total vegetarian, no, but I'd like to answer two things that were asked to Karen, actually. The question of age. I was obese and with morbidity, what we called, for maybe 50 years. Now I'm 80 years old. And yes, it's possible to come back to a healthy food intake. And even if we're old, we can change habits that we have had for many, many, many years. So this is a question that was asked to Karen. I don't know who asked it, but there is a way to make changes. And as far as sodium, I was using salt enormously, and I barely eat salt anymore. And same thing with sugar. I used to eat a lot of things with food with sugar, sodas, for instance, and I barely eat those anymore. And I don't really miss this. The change was done. So when you talk about my food intake, as far as vegetables, I eat pretty much all the vegetables that were that Sarah and Karen told us about. There's a way to add a lot of spices. So we get to, we learn to use spices, because sometimes vegetables don't taste so much, but if you add a little bit of garlic or mustard or whatever you like, then it becomes really interesting. And I can tell you that I pretty much eat all the vegetables, any vegetables. So it's going very well.
Wonderful to hear that you were able to make such changes to your diet, and in spite of the fact that you had different habits before, things are a lot different now, and I think that's wonderful. I think it brings some hope and perspective. Prochaine question. Would you like to go on?
Next question. The only thing I wanted to add, and that's not in your program, is that myself, before the meeting, I talked about it. I'm in a program, it's not to be on a diet. I respect everything that's been given up to now, but I did some research to lose weight because I used to weigh 300 pounds. Now I'm 240, so that's much better. And I continue to lose weight. So it's what we call the intermittent fasting. I don't know, someone will want to talk about it or make research. It's just that you eat, for instance, for 8 hours, on an 8-hour period, whatever, 9 to 4, or you can have some food during this period. And the other 16 hours, we don't eat anything at all. We just drink water and non-sugary liquids, and it works really, really well. Well, it's something that was not talked about today.
Are you able to comment on intermittent fasting and on how that's made a difference for Normand?
As far as intermittent fasting, yes, it works with certain people. It's a way of life, and I think it's not necessarily adapted to anyone. So I think research has been done. There is positive facts as far as resistance to insulin, but I think it's something that's very individual. I've tested it myself. It's not for me. It's not for me. I think for some people it works well, and for some people it doesn't necessarily work well. So I'm a little bit ambiguous on it. But with Mr. Normand, it's been working really well. It still works really well as far as nutritional state. His nutritional state is stable. He has good energy. He does his dialysis. It's beneficial for him. But as far as saying it's good for everyone, I wouldn't say that.
I think that gives us food for thought. Next question actually is for Karen. We do have somebody asking about substitutes for grains and seeds if they have diverticulitis.
Yes, no, certainly a good question. When it comes to just managing diverticulitis, again, that's going to be a little bit individual in terms of like symptoms and how kind of that has been managed before in the past. And so therefore, like kind of looking at how grains and seeds kind of fit into that. The research when it comes to managing it can also be a bit mixed, but generally, it's kind of the stages of where you are, right? If you're having a flare up, if you were just like very early on, or if it's like maintained over a long time. I can comment more in terms of just adding fiber in general, and in gut health, I would kind of comment more like going slow, right? If the fiber is a source that you maybe not have a lot right now, and that you're thinking about adding more legumes, or you're thinking about adding more of these, like start with a small dose, right? Like whether you're doing just 2 or 3 tablespoons, like once or twice a week, and like slowly work your way up, get your gut kind of pointed to that added fiber that you're maybe not necessarily having right now. But certainly I would say it is very individual. And so if there's a space and time for adding in grains and seeds in your diet because you're not having a flare up or you're feeling well enough to do it, that's something that you can also consult with your team about too. And another thing that I just kind of want to maybe tag on with the intermittent fasting piece as well, just to also kind of comment with Sarah and kind of what she said, it is a little bit individual. I also want to say like too, I think when it comes to overall healthy eating, we just want to honor, you know, our hunger cues, honor just overall how we feel with nutrition and health. So like certain times you want to honor like, okay, like we do feel really satisfied with our meals, or we just feel like we certain foods, you know, elate feelings and emotions. And so kind of again, like bringing it all back as a full circle in our relationship with food. And so I think like those are all things to kind of consider too. It's not for everyone, but for some, like it can work, but just as long as we're in a good peace with ourselves as well with our relationship with food.
Absolutely, thank you. Another question is again for either Karen or Sarah. We have somebody asking for nutrition tips if you're following a Caribbean diet.
Yeah, in terms of different foods that are kind of available in that way, I would certainly say there's lots of like fresh fruits, vegetables, certain tropical fruits that are available, or whether it's adding in more like legumes and or plantains and some other starchier choices to it. So it's maybe the combination of how we add all of those foods together. They all can be included in helpful ways. There's lots of recipes online too in terms of adapting to Caribbean flavors. And so sometimes it's the heat, it's the spices that we kind of lean on when it comes to giving us those profiles. And so certainly from a fiber and a whole grain perspective, even if we are sometimes leaning towards like our black eyed peas or our like brown rice and things like that, like we can find ways where we can include small portions of it and kind of like add it into a helpful diet.
Karen, Sarah?
En gros, c'est un peu comme Karen.
Yes, I would say pretty much what Karen said. The Caribbean diet is rich in legumes and fruits and vegetables. That's very important, but it's important also to have whole grains and also be careful with the different condiments that we use, sauces and other. I have Asian patients who eat a lot of added salt in the little sauces and others. So this is where, but at the base, it's a fresh Caribbean diet. It's a lot of fresh, contains a lot of fresh fruit, so that's very good. Or the type of beverages like juices, sodas, wine. Sometimes we feel like having a drink. So what would be the recommended portion per week? Well, depending, I would say as far as wine, it's important to respect the recommendations that Éduc Alcool is giving. So these are the recommendations. So when we take medication, it's not really recommended to take alcohol. But at the same time, you're responsible adults. If you want to take some alcohol, we suggest to have it while you are eating. So as far as absorption, it's better. In Quebec, we have recommendations from an organization called Éducacol. There must be some other recommendations in the rest of Canada. As far as sodas and juices, if we have trouble with potassium, there is often high level of potassium. Then we recommend to avoid juices so that potassium does not increase, because there's in juice more potassium that's easily absorbed. So we prefer fresh fruits. As far as sodas, once again, if you take diet, there's no calories necessarily. But if we have phosphorus problem, then we don't recommend Pepsi, because they have a high phosphoric acid component. So it really depends on each person. If we have diabetes, we have a weight issue as far as juices and sodas. But these are food that don't bring a lot of
Karen, do you have anything that you would like to add?
good.
Certainly, I would just echo exactly everything that Sarah had said in terms of the recommendations for beverages. Like definitely when it comes to juices, like we do say, if we can get it from eating the whole fruits, like that would be ideal. And then in terms of adding flavors to our beverages, right? Sometimes it's a little lemon in the water that goes a long way. Sometimes a little bit of mint or a bit of cucumber or something to freshen up maybe our beverage choice. Also, when it comes to like the lower sugar options, like some people like the carbonation. So whether you're leaning more towards like getting yourself like a soda stream or like a Perrier or like different types of sparkling waters, where when you look at the label, there's no added phosphorus, there's no added like potassium additives or anything that way. So those are some ways. Certainly, again, like it is very individual. Like alcohol is also something you do want to be very individual about. Types of alcohols, of course, right? Like if we're looking at beers, wines, liqueurs, like there's maybe different compositions of nutrition that's hidden in those sources. And so again, like just keeping in mind, like, when or how often, or is it a special occasion, and like what are our other alternatives that we can keep in place for that, is what I would say.
Mm-hmm. Being intentional about our choices when it comes to the beverages that we're having.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Pierre, I'm curious. You said that you've had some really great experiences with the two dietitians that you've worked with during your treatment. So can you comment for our listeners today on how best to advocate for yourself?
Well, first of all, when I started doing chronic kidney disease, right away, the nutritionist took me up, and then they reassessed everything I was eating in a typical day and where my creatine was at. So based on that, they reduced the portion. So proteins, they reduced also sugar. I didn't eat too much sugar, but I always did. I was always a bit intolerant to sugar. So in my food, there was always a portion of sugar in the food. That's when we assessed it and we reduced this proportion of food sugars or glucids. And over the years, I managed to push back dialysis by changing what I was eating. I still had to go into dialysis, as I said earlier on, And I also had a transplant thanks to a living donor. And then Sarah picked up. And with Sarah, we reassessed what I had because now I became like before. I could, eat what I wanted, do things that I was not able to do before, but that's danger. So with Sarah, we reassessed everything. These servings, they're a bit bigger than before, but still, we have to remain careful because we need anti-rejection medication and prednisone, cortisone, which increases appetite. And I can guarantee that I'm hungry. With Sarah, we made the portions smaller, the serving smaller, we increased the variety. And this means that we've incorporated many plant-based food. So my portion of vegetable before was not half the dish, now it is half of the dish. My protein portion is far smaller, and I can maintain my weight, a healthy weight, and I'm very active every day. I've done skiing, Nordic skiing, downhill skiing. I do every day 4 kilometers of walking with my dog. I didn't have the energy to do this before. Now, thanks to a balanced food intake, things are going well. And like I said earlier on, life is beautiful. And Sarah keeps an eye on me.
Thank you. Karen and Sarah, is there anything that you might give in the way of advice to somebody who wants to advocate for themselves a little bit more in terms of finding a nutritionist and how to work with them?
Yeah, so certainly I would just say kind of like when it comes to like your healthcare team and like kind of involving all members of there, if there's any kind of like particular concerns with like blood work or just kind of like asking the right questions when you're in appointments, kind of like inquiring if there's any specific recommendations at that stage of where you're at. Those are great ways where you can kind of like work with your ally health team, whether you're asking at the nursings or like the pharmacy and like other like ways to reach out to also source out a dietitian if available in your unit. So certainly kind of reassessing maybe your goals, where you're at, where you're feeling that you would like to have some support with, and like kind of looking at seeking where services are available.
Thank you, Karen. That's great advice. Sarah?
Oui, pardon. Nous, c'est sûr que...
Yeah, sorry, us, of course. We're kind of short-staffed on nutritionists. There aren't that many. But in nephrology, what's important is, well, nephrologists, they don't necessarily propose right off the bat to go see a nutritionist. So there's still a responsibility of the invalid patient to ask for it. If they're interested, to ask their nephrologist, and they'll be happy to give you to have a consultation with a dietitian. So you have to talk about, of course, if you don't ask for it, you won't necessarily have that service. So of course, there are nutritionists in all dialysis centers, but more and more the population is getting bigger and there are less nutritionists. But when you ask for it, of course, when people are interested, well, they'll put them higher up as opposed to people who are not even asking for it.
Thanks very much. I think we're just about out of time. We have time for just one more question. And this one, I think, can go to Karen. There's a question about sugar alternatives. So are natural or artificial sweeteners better than white sugar for renal patients who are concerned about diabetes?
Yeah, no, certainly a great question. So when it comes to other like artificial sweeteners and things like that, I think it all the research in terms of that too is kind of looking at like how much is it that we're really using and like where we're using it. And so when it comes to all the different types, like certainly in a small, moderate amount, it can be appropriate and it can be safe. But again, in terms of how we kind of incorporate it too, right? So if we're kind of looking at sugar in terms of like the way our body kind of like enjoy sweetness and the way it gets processed. And so whether it's coming from like white sugar, it's coming from honey, kind of like the way it kind of have impacts on our blood sugars, certainly the way it's processed, we can notice like that it can still raise sugars in that way. I would certainly say with all the artificial sweeteners, again, that like it is mixed, but if you're including it in a moderate amount and you are finding it like in terms of like beverages like diet sodas and whatnot, and we're just doing like it in moderation, then there is a time and space where I would kind of refer again to Health Canada, who has like a whole approval in terms of what's available and what is the safe dosage in terms of like artificial sweeteners. And then maybe I'll also lean on Sarah to see if she has any comments on about this as well.
Sarah, would there be anything you'd like to add to that?
Juste vous dire, nous ici.
Well, just to say, there's a website on Diabetes Quebec, website for Diabetes Quebec. On their website, there's a good information on all these artificial sweeteners. So I imagine that throughout the rest of Canada, this information is probably there too. So it could be a good site to consult to have the up-to-date information, or Health Canada. Obviously, they must have roughly the equivalent, but generally speaking, these are sugar alternatives. So you have to use them with moderation. That's roughly the rule.
Thanks very much. So we are out of time, but if your question hasn't been addressed, if we haven't had an opportunity to actually answer that, please do send it through to kidneyprograms@kidney.ca. And we have lots of delicious plant-based recipes on the Kidney Community Kitchen as well. So please feel free to visit there. There are lots of opportunities to connect with dietitians and ask questions. There's a meal planner. There are a number of great resources there for everybody. I'd like to thank Normand and Pierre, Karen and Sarah for educating us and inspiring us to incorporate plant-based foods into a delicious kidney diet. We really appreciate having you walk us through all of that. So with that, thank you everybody for joining the sessions.